So these cocoa trees take 30 years before they come to harvest. And they grow under the canopy. So they're under these huge hardwood trees that go up like 150 feet. And all of a sudden, these hardwood trees became very valuable. And so they started cutting them until they were almost deforested in Ghana, and they passed a law to stop cutting them. But the graft was so heavy that they were so valuable that people were getting kickbacks for that. So anyway, to make a long story short, the chief of her village said, stop cutting these trees, because when they came down, they crushed the cocoa trees and destroyed the farmers' income in their village. And so there was a chief above him, the regional chief, who was getting $10,000 for every one of these trees that they cut down. So he fired the chief, and he put in a woman as a chief. And this had never been heard of before, and she's somewhere in here, I'll find her. But he put in a woman as a chief, and he thought because he could control a woman. And she became his biggest nightmare. She started complaining more than the guy did. And she got together with the organization CARE, and they said, listen, he's the guy that's breaking the laws. So they ended up getting this provisional chief thrown in jail. She became this legend in her part of the world. And because of that, this woman becoming so popular, and all the girls in the community, all of a sudden, were no longer deciding that they were going to have children at 13 and 14 and take that normal route, that they would become teachers, and several wanted to become chiefs, and I think I have some of their pictures in here. But it just changed, that one incident just changed the whole, that one role model changed the whole area in terms of what women and girls could be. And it was just, to me, such an incredible story of how just one incident can transform a culture. So that's the story of Augustina. She wants to be a math teacher. And I'll find Madame Coco. She's around here somewhere. Yeah, here she is over here.
Madame Coco.
So this is Madame Coco. She's the one that got everything changed. This is one of the hardwood trees that they had cut down. So that's her story. Here's another very interesting one over here, and they kind of go together. This is a Kai, and I met a Kai in Bangladesh. And so as you know, trafficking is still a huge industry in the world. The estimates are like 800,000 girls are trafficked, bought and sold every year in the world. So, and it is slavery. It's essentially slavery. So it's even, you think of slavery of something that happened here, back in 1800s, and but no, slavery continues, and it takes many forms. But one of the forms is sexual slavery. Anyway, a Kai was sold into a brothel in Bangladesh, in a little town called Tangail. And it's interesting, Bangladesh, prostitution is legal, but it's a Muslim country, and it is considered completely immoral. But yet, these brothels flourish. And in her brothel, there are 700 sex workers in this brothel. And a Kai was sold into the brothel when she was 13 years old. She was told, you're going to have a job at a garment factory. And her aunt actually sold her. And that happens a lot. Relatives will sell these young girls because they get this kickback. So anyway, she ends up in the brothel, and she's been sold to a madam in a brothel. And the madam is a girl, was a girl that herself was sold in at one time. And the stigma in Bangladesh for being a prostitute, they call them sex workers, is so great that once you go to the brothel, you don't get out. There's no way you can get out. I mean, you're so stigmatized, you can't hold another job. They can't have a proper burial, and the burials are very important to them. They have to wear a certain two-piece sari instead of the three-piece sari. They can't wear shoes in public. They can't have a bank account. So any money they make, they can't save to get out if they, could possibly get out. So they're just condemned to the brothel for the rest of their lives. So Akai, sold in when she was 13, tried to commit suicide when she was 18 because of her situation. She realized there was no way out. It failed, and she decided she would donate her life to improving the condition of the women in this brothel. So she started advocating that they could send their kids to school. A lot of these women have families, they have children. And the kids would end up being just wards of the brothel. They couldn't get out. So she got the laws changed so they could send their kids to school, that they could get a bank account. And she did this all, and in between being harassed by the police. And while I was there doing this story, a bunch of the women came in and they started jumping up and down, hugging each other, and Aklima was one of them. And they said, they just convicted the police, one of these police officers, for beating up one of the sex workers because she had him wear a condom and demanded that he wanted not to wear a condom, and of course they do want to be protected, and he beat up one of the sex workers, and he finally got arrested. That was going on all the time. So she essentially took the condom use from 0% on up to 86% in the brothel. And I was being led around by this young doctor, young female doctor, a recent graduate. And she says they test all these women for HIV, but we do it anonymously. I said, well, what good does that do if you don't know who has it? She said, we have to do it that way because if they identify the person who has HIV, they will be murdered that night. I mean, it's just, you can't imagine what they live under. So anyway, that's the story of Akai. She ended up being on the cover of a Newsweek-like magazine up in Canada. Her story became very popular later after I had met her. And again, trafficking we think, okay, that's Bangladesh. No, 100,000 girls were trafficked here in the United States every year. And this woman, Rachel Lloyd, she was a sex worker in London, tried to commit suicide, failed. Kind of the same story as Akai. And she has started a program in Harlem called GEMS, and she's changing the laws all over the country. One of the big things she said is, first of all, we've got to change the whole nomenclature. So let's see if I can tell this right. If a 13-year-old has sex with a 40-year-old guy, he will be probably thrown in jail, and she will be given some counseling. But if the guy leaves $50 on the table, she will go to juvenile hall as a child prostitute, and he will get some counseling. So just calling these kids these 13-year-olds, prostitutes, has to change. They're exploited children being bought and sold by adults. And so part of her job is just getting the terminology changed in our court system. And so you'll read a lot about her in the coming years, I'm sure, because she's becoming more and more known for her work in getting that whole thing changed. So that's that story. I don't know how long you want me to go on. I could go around here telling stories all day. Do you want me to tell more stories? Do you want to ask questions? Yes.
This is almost a multi-layer. So how do you find these people? How do you get to them? And then when you interact with them, like how long do you spend with them? Because these seem they're very open to you, so there's a lot of trust. So when you spend time with them, and then how much instruction do you give? Because they're beautifully presented. So is that your eye and your knowledge, or do you interact with them?
Okay. So first of all, how I find them. You know, that, I could look around the room and tell you a little bit of a different story with each one. These, I was working for the organization CARE. So I do a lot of work with NGOs to tell their stories for them. So they introduce me. So I couldn't just walk into a brothel and get a story like that. So having access, I use organizations a lot to tell my story. And so for the photographers here that want to tell stories, I must say, if you have a story you want to tell or an issue you want to dive into, try and find an organization that has that same agenda, and you can partner with them, and you can have a symbiotic relationship to help get that story out there. Secondly, how long do I spend with the person? That varies. Of course, with Akai, we've sat down and interviewed her, and again, I'm working through translators all the time, and so it's really not me making the bond. You know, we're kind of doing it through translators. It isn't like you and I sitting down and having a conversation. You know, you have this person in between. But basically, I just let them know what my intentions are, what I'm there for, what I'm there to do, and if they want to be a part of it or not. Because obviously I've got to get model releases, if I'm doing it for an NGO especially. And so they become very willing because they want their story out there. You know, some people don't. They just, you know, just don't want. But the people who do want to step forward and say, look, this is what's happening, and I want my story out there. So they're very open. And in terms of, do I arrange them or, like Rachel, yeah, we went out on the streets. Let's find a good place out on the streets of Harlem to take the picture. Mostly, it's pretty much where they are. So I, you know, but you're always looking, okay, what's going to be in the background here? So you may have to turn them this way or that way and look about where your lights are. Some of these I have lit with strobes, and I do that less and less all the time because of digital. Makes it a lot easier that you don't have to do that.
And then is that one image, some of these that you've made into a diptych? Or
Yeah.
Actually two images?
Yeah, I've just shot in 2 shots, this boom, boom. I've done vertical diptychs, I've done side-to-side diptychs. When I want to get more of a scene of what's going on in the background, I'll do a diptych. And yeah.
Did you take all the photos in this particular work with the same equipment, the same camera, same type?
Oh, that's a good question. You know,
like a large format or whatever.
Right. My main camera was a Hasselblad medium format camera, but many of these pictures later on became 35 millimeter after digital became. This is a show that kind of bridged digital and film. So a lot of this was shot in film, but there's images here that were shot with 35 millimeter digital. Leica Kai is 35 millimeter digital. Rachel Lloyd was a Hasselblad digital back. This is 35 millimeter digital. This is Hasselblad medium format. So you can see it's kind of hard to tell the difference, right? You can do so much with digital nowadays. That's Hasselblad medium format. That's 35 millimeter digital. So to answer your question, both.
Could you talk about the monks in that particular photo and your interest in Tibet and environmental change more recently?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So this image of these three nuns, when I first went to Tibet in 1993, I went there with a very specific agenda. I wanted to tell the world, or make it a little more clear in our country, what had happened in Tibet. Because in 1993, it was before the Dalai Lama has become as popular as he is today. For me, it was just, a bumper sticker I would see every once in a while that said, "Free Tibet," and I thought, free from what? And I didn't really know what was going on. And so I went there to tell the story. These three nuns had just escaped out of Tibet. They had all been jailed in Tibet and tortured with cattle prods, shocked with cattle, horrible stories, for protesting the occupation of their country. China invaded Tibet in 1950 and has occupied it ever since. But that's a very touchy subject in the world now, right? So anyway, I went there to do a very political statement, and I photographed refugees, but I put these women in this show mainly to show that, we think of Tibet and the Tibetans as very enlightened, spiritual people, but they discriminate against women just like any other culture. And women in Tibet are not, the whole educational system in Tibet was in the monasteries. And there weren't that many nunneries. There weren't that many women monks, so they very seldomly got educated. And so anyway, that's why this particular exhibit's this particular image is in this exhibit. The whole thing, I've just done another book on Tibet, which is downstairs in the bookstore, and I went back 16 years later. They didn't let me in the country for 16 years because of the work I had done. They blocked my website in China, but anyway, I went back, I got in after 16 years, and I did another book. And I decided, okay, I'm not going to be political, I just want to tell what's happening in Tibet now. The big story, what's going on in Tibet right now, is climate change. It's the big story that's happening in the whole world, but it's happening twice as fast on the Tibetan Plateau. And this big area of the size of Europe, the Tibetan Plateau, that houses is called the third pole because it houses the largest body of frozen water outside of the North and South Pole. And that body of water has been a bank of water that has nourished civilizations for centuries, millennia. And now 2 billion people depend on that frozen body of banked water that is going away at a rapid rate. So the Ganges, the Indus, the Yellow River, the Yangtze, the Mekong, all these rivers that feed 2 billion people, a third of the world's population, is going to be gone in, some say, 30 or 40 years. So you're seeing these environmental refugees coming out of Somalia and the sub-Saharan area of Africa into Kenya, 100,000, that'll be nothing compared to what's going to happen over in Asia. And everybody, China's scrambling to figure out what's going on. China has put in almost 100 dams up on the Tibetan Plateau. They've dammed the Mekong River, which feeds all of Indochina, Cambodia, Vietnam, Thailand. And you can imagine the wars being fought over oil now. Watch it, with water it's going to be. So there's a huge story that was part of the book, and I talked about how the devotion of the people is still very strong, how the development. China, you can't imagine how much China builds in a short period of time, and how much they are in the rest of the world building. And it's an amazing culture. The 100 dams, that's nothing. I went back after 15 years, I couldn't even recognize Lhasa. It would be like coming back to my hometown of Seattle, if I came back after 15 years and found Manhattan. It's that kind of building. It's just unbelievable what they are capable of. So that's that picture.
I had an interesting experience. I was asked to show these 5 Chinese gentlemen who were there in Dallas at some kind of conference. And they called on me because they thought I spoke Chinese, which I don't. But at any rate, we had one interpreter. I drove them all around Dallas and took them in places, showed them things. And I said, we hear something about that many of your Chinese people have gone into Tibet now. Why is that? All innocence. And he said, well, we were out there to help the Tibetan people. They're very primitive and very cruel. And our people have gone in there to help them. I thought perhaps the Tibetans had a different attitude about it.
Oh yeah.
But that is the story he had been told, and he believed it wholeheartedly.
Oh yeah. And they believe the Dalai Lama is an evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, but to me it's a classic story of two cultures coming together, and each having a very strong, a strength that they could share with one another. In terms of the Tibetans, they have a spiritual culture and a knowledge of the human spirit and consciousness that they've investigated for 2,500 years, and they understand it in a way that we don't in modern culture. And on the other hand, the Chinese have this incredible machine, so they can put in roads. I was on the Tibetan Plateau, and there is solar cell towers everywhere. So in the most remote part of the world, I never dropped a cell phone call. I got home to Seattle, I had to do a talk up in Vancouver. On the way up, I dropped it 5 times. It's incredible what they built. They put in hospitals, roads, schools. And yes, Tibet was a feudal society. It was mainly, everything was in the monasteries, and then there were the people who worked in the fields. And it could benefit from modernization. But to lose their spirituality and everything that holistic look at the world, what is happiness? How are we finding happiness? To them, happiness isn't hunting for money, fame, a lot of the trappings that we seem to think will get us there and are beginning to realize won't. It is getting rid of the ego, getting rid of what they call self-cherishing. You get to learn it as we get older, right? But all those things they get as children. They tell their kids they believe in reincarnation, and whether that myth is true or false, we won't know till we're gone, right? But what they're saying is, everyone you meet they'll tell this to their kids. Everyone you meet has at one time been your mother. Whether it's the cop giving you a ticket, or the spouse you're having an argument with, or whoever, that person has been your mother at one time. So it's a way, you know, it's a myth that allows them to teach compassion. Yeah. But,
Teach it very well.
yeah. Anyway, it's a wonderful culture.
Yeah.
They have a lot to offer the world. And in a way, this whole invasion of Tibet that has got them out, in the Dalai Lama living in exile, has brought Buddhism to the rest of the world in a very beneficial way. Yeah.
Is there anybody's portrait that you take that you can't include in things you publish?
Uh,
Has that happened?
Have I ever taken a portrait that I can't publish?
Or well, like, do you ever tell somebody like, this will be included in something that then you can eventually?
Usually, yes. So I do a lot of especially in the women's work, a lot of stuff I did for UN Women had to do with acid attacks in Cambodia, what I did. And even though the women wanted to come forward and tell their story, there were concerns in the UN that didn't allow us to put their faces on. This one organization in, again, Cambodia, on trafficking, was a halfway house for girls, and they wanted me to tell a story about them, but we couldn't show their faces. And they were teaching them to open up, because a lot of girls that have been trafficked or abused sexually when they're children or abused in any way won't tell their story. They keep it within, and they were teaching them the American Sign Language, and that was allowing them to open up. They would open up through sign language, which was kind of interesting. So we were going to do that way. But there are some instances, but usually, again, I'm only telling the story of people that want to step forward and tell their story. Any other questions?
Did you ask them to look away from the camera, or were they just reluctant?
Yeah. In this case, so this is lit. This is when I first started doing that. This is one of my first projects, really. And so I just put a softbox over here and had him look at the light. And shot it from this direction. So sometimes, when you're doing a portrait, sometimes you'll notice it'll be stronger if they look away. And it just depends on the person. And that's the thing for anybody that's a portrait photographer. I notice a lot of my students will, if I'm teaching a class, will be taking the picture, and they're at that point when they're so nervous that they're not really seeing the person. They're not watching for the emotion or the expression, and they're just taking the picture and not really seeing when it's the strongest. So you get to that point where it's a matter of just being comfortable, really, with it. And I tell them, so many people think of, well, I'm taking a picture. But, when I was doing this work, especially with the Hasselblad, before digital, I was giving everybody a Polaroid. So it was like, I say it's a gift. You're not taking something, you're giving them something. Because not too many people come up to me and say, hey, can I take your picture? I think you're so great. Well, there's somebody right there. But, it's kind of a gift to say to somebody, boy, I really love what you're all about, or I love the way you look, or whatever it is, I'd love to take your picture. It kind of makes their day.
So do you feel uncomfortable in front of the camera taking
Do I?
Yeah.
I do. I do. I'm like, so many Americans, God, I'm getting old. And, geez, my nose is too big, or, I'm too fat, or I'm too this, or too. So the trick is in taking somebody's picture in our culture, the trick is to wear them out. And we used to shoot what we called air film during the days of film. You didn't want to waste a lot of film. So you just play like you were taking pictures. And just wear them down until they finally just drop it. But in these cultures, they're there and they're not concerned about themselves as much. They're wondering, about you. Who is this guy? And what are these, especially if you have a light there, what is all this? So they're more where you want them to be, outer focused, instead of inner focused and self-conscious. Yeah.
Do you ever have what I call the gift of follower? Do you know what has become the person's after the initial story?
Not often, but yes. In here, oh boy, I've had people look at some of my images at Tika Buzayan, who is not in this show, and went and hunted her down in Ethiopia and supported her whole family, changed their whole lives. Here, I was telling Maza about Abai. Let's see, where is Abai? And I'll tell her story. Yeah, it's over here. So I followed Abai up quite a bit. And so this is an incredible story. I won't tell the whole story here because I'll be doing that tomorrow night. But anyway, she ended female genital cutting in her village in the most incredible way, in the most brave way. Broke away from it when she was 8 years old, just so brave. But in a culture where every girl has to be cut. I mean, you're ostracized if you're not. But anyway, so when the book came out and we did the exhibit, we wanted her to come and tour with us around the country when we were talking about the whole exhibit and what it was about. And so we were communicating with her quite a bit. But as I told Maza, we couldn't get her out of the country. It was 2006 or 7, and our country had that very strong post 9/11, shut off the borders and be careful. And even though, coming from a country where Islam is somewhat strong, and she was, I guess that was part of it. But she has kids, she has a husband with a great job, she has every reason in the world to go back, because we thought, well, maybe a lot of people come here and then just disappear. They jump their visa, right? And they thought, well, maybe that was the reason. But we had her booked on the Oprah program. We couldn't, we couldn't get her in. We had a senator trying to get her in. But anyway, I have communicated with her. And some of these, like Chandini, I communicate with, but not a lot. Usually I'm there to do the story, and then I'm off doing another program. Whoever asked that question.
How are you editing this? I mean, with the hospital, like some is in color, some looks.
Pardon?
How are you? Part of it is in color, part of it is not.
Oh yeah, that's this technique. For those of you who are down the lecture downstairs, This is kind of a technique I became known for. I mean, it helped my career immensely. It's just, throwing a little bit of sepia tone in areas of the image. And I used to do it all in the dark room with chemicals and masking. I'd have to mask out part of the black and white print. And it was just extremely hard to do. Now it's so easy to do. Anybody can do it. And you'll see it done here and there a lot. So, but yeah, I just, when I first started photography, I first fell in love with black and white photography. And, but I wanted to see a little more than just the straight black and white. So I started experimenting and just found this style. And
So many of these are, essentially they're posed, you have somebody's, aren't these mostly posed?
yeah.
How do you feel whenever you take spontaneous portraits? Like, what do you get out of that experience?
Okay, it's a very different experience, and I like it. Doing portraits is sometimes hard because you're working with the person. They have to look straight at the lens, and I'm doing a lot of film now. I'm shooting a lot of, not film versus digital, but motion picture video. And I'm telling a lot of my stories with video now. And I do a lot of shooting of the B-roll, all like a fly on the wall. You don't want to be seen. You don't want to be a part of you want to be invisible as possible. And I love that, just disappearing and shooting what I'm seeing as it unfolds. And not being in there, being a part of the picture. Here I'm a part of the picture. Please, will you stand there? Okay, I like to put hands in the picture, so how am I going to get her hands up? So she happens to put her hands up and the camel starts nibbling her coat. So, it's more working with the person. It's a collaboration, a portrait is. Whereas, other types of photography, more candid documentary photography, is you want to be unseen as possible. And I like both, But it's really freeing to be able to do the candid stuff, because all you have to do is be there and know how to compose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Phil. I think we maybe
Okay.
should stop there.
All right.